Is it fear of Donald Trump? Is it fear of electoral consequences based on the ire of MAGA? What is it?
There's a political economy to the invertebrate discipline and cultishness of the Republican Party.
Donald Trump is objectively a lot of things, but he is objectively not decent. He is objectively not smart. He is objectively not skilled at most things. He's objectively not even loved by his own wife, right? But Donald Trump has mastered, he is objectively good at projection. And he went online last night at 9:22 p.m. Eastern Time to Truth Social to attack maybe one of the most objectively smart and decent, caring, loving, patriotic members of the House of Representatives, Jamie Raskin. Because Jamie Raskin has the ability to communicate exactly the harms that will be brought upon the American people by this tax bill, by this budget bill. This is what Donald Trump said. Representative Jamie Raskin, a third-rate Democrat politician, has no idea what is in our fantastic tax cut bill, nor would he understand it if he did. This dope has been consistently losing to me for years, and I love watching his ugly face as he is forced to consistently, he loves the word consistently, he consistently uses the word consistently in this single post, is forced to consistently concede defeat to Trump. And tonight should be another one of those nights. Raskin is a bad politician and a total loser. Man, he's a total loser, says Donald Trump. So Donald Trump here is attacking Jamie Raskin for his looks. That's like a pig bitching about somebody being a pig, you know. He's attacking Jamie Raskin for his ability to understand this legislation. A noted constitutional scholar and definitive smart guy, Jamie Raskin. And that he's a total loser. The President of the United States, everybody, while Republicans whine about bringing the temperature down, as though it's up to us, as though it's on us, Democrats, independents, normal, decent Americans, to bring the temperature down while he's got a lighter and some lighter fluid in his hands. Jamie Raskin did not take this lying down. He went on with Lawrence O'Donnell on MSNBC last night and had something characteristically snarky, which is just wonderful, with his dry delivery, which I love. Watch this.
Suppose I don't mind being called a loser several times by Donald Trump, given that he's our only president who has lost the popular vote for president in 2 different elections. And the last time when he lost by more than 7 million votes to Joe Biden, it upset him so much that he incited an insurrection against the Constitution, against his own vice president, and against the Congress of the United States. And so, that one doesn't trouble me so much. I suppose I don't like being called ugly by Donald Trump, but not everybody can live up to his exquisite levels of handsomeness and personal physical grace. And so that I would consider myself probably in the large majority of American men who simply can't live up to the exquisite standards that he set and his extraordinary popularity with American women.
You know, there are few politicians, not like so few, but there are a few that I really, really admire. And a couple weeks ago, 10 days or so ago, I'm all over the place. David Pakman and I had the opportunity to sit down with Congressman Raskin. And let me tell you, you can tell just by watching him on TV that he's a genuine character, that he's a loving individual who is absolutely patriotic and wants to change this country for the better, wants to make America what it claims to be, what we've claimed it to be for years and years, for generations and for centuries, right? And we sat down with him and I talked a lot about those particular ideals that we should be living up to, about the deleterious effects of Donald Trump's influence on American politics. And I want to share that interview with you now. I mean, what better time to show the world exactly who Jamie Raskin is than on the heels of an attack from Donald Trump. Watch this. Or as Donald Trump would say, enjoy. Thank you for your attention to this matter. Watch this.
Congressman, thanks for joining us. We appreciate you.
I'm psyched to be here.
With all of the damage and the deleterious effects of Donald Trump's the policies and his appointments, RFK and Linda McMahon and Doug Collins, I mean, the list goes on and on and on. What should the coordinated strategy from elected officials be to combat, I know it's kind of an overarching question, but to combat what's happening, both from messaging, but also action, to combat Donald Trump right now?
Well, we've got to use every lever at our disposal in the constitutional system to fight back. And that's what we're doing. So we just had a hearing. I did this with Dick Durbin. We had a bicameral hearing with the Democrats in the House and the Senate with state attorneys general. And so we had a bunch of attorney generals come to talk about what they're doing to fight back. And we're working with them, filing amicus briefs in all of these cases, whether it's against Donald Trump's unconstitutional birthright citizenship order purporting to nullify birthright citizenship, or his impounding of hundreds of billions of dollars in federal funds through an unconstitutional spending freeze. Whatever it might be, we're intervening to stop them in court. We're fighting in the House. We're fighting in the Senate. And above all, we're fighting in the streets. I mean, I thought that the No Kings rallies were not only a magnificent achievement, but a really important intervention in terms of the dynamics of American politics, because the people are sovereign. And so we're fighting along with our allies at the state level and the local level. This mayoral victory in New York that happened yesterday is huge for progressive politics in the country, just huge. And a demonstration that we can build massive turnout. We can up turnout. Same thing happened with Mikey Sherrill in New Jersey. 350,000 new people came out to vote, she told me, increasing the numbers. And, that's ultimately what progressive politics is about. It's progress for the country by getting more people engaged and involved in the fight for freedom and democracy.
What are the levers that exist specifically last time you were on my show, we talked about, we use phrases like the law dictates that, the Constitution guarantees that, and then that all is in a framework where people actually listen to court orders or they provide the due process that's due to people. If you have an administration that's just ignoring all of that, and you have a party that doesn't really do much to say, hey, we want to hold you accountable as the law and order candidate and party that you said you were part of,
right.
What can you do at the end of the day?
So, that is the right question, because if you believe in the Constitution in 2025, you got to fight for the Constitution in 2025. So take war powers. It's just totally abundantly, overwhelmingly clear that only Congress has the power to declare war and to take us to war. I was reading some stuff this morning from James Madison, who said, this provision in the Constitution demonstrates the wisdom of the Constitution, because the framers did not trust one guy. That for them, the image they had was a king, but a president could become a king and plunge us into wars of fortune and profit and avarice and caprice, right? Somebody could just decide, I don't like that person, I'm going to go to war, or we're going to make some money. And, Madison said, just like the Constitution says only Congress can get us into war, only Congress, through the treaty power, can get us into an alliance. And there you need a 2/3 vote of the Senate in order to get us into, a treaty. So, the framers were just deathly afraid of what a president would do if he alone had the war power. So what are we doing? Well, we got the War Powers Act, which a prior Congress passed, but we're trying to implement the War Powers Act. We're trying to get a majority of our colleagues, and it's a bipartisan at this point, to sign on to a War Powers Act resolution demanding that the president come here. We are raising our constitutional prerogatives on a daily basis. We just had a press conference this morning about that. And, You know, the wisdom of the founders is vindicated by the fact that what looks like it might be a cakewalk, and so why shouldn't a president be able to just bomb Iran? The more you look at it, suddenly begins to disassemble in different ways, and there's a lot of fraudulence and a lot of PR that's built into these, presidential hits. That's something the framers were really aware of. They thought that presidents would get into a war of glory, a war of ego, just to try to pump themselves up.
I'm a little surprised to hear the word fraud brought up in the same sentence as Donald Trump, but we'll ignore that. Apart from violating Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution with war powers and trying to amend the Constitution through executive action, what do you think governors using their 10th Amendment rights under the Constitution, what more can they be doing? What would you like to see them be doing to combat Donald Trump?
Well, I suppose it's an irony that the people who paid such lip service to the powers of the states and federalism, state governments, are just trampling the powers of the states on a daily basis. Governor Newsom and Mayor Bass had the situation under control in California. It was like mass, nonviolent, peaceful protest, and then there was a 8 or 10 block area where there were riots happening, and they dealt with it. They've got the police power there. They've got the chief of police. They didn't need Donald Trump coming in, but of course, he didn't see riots happening 6 blocks away from where he was on January 6, 2021. He didn't see a threat when 140 of our police officers were being injured, wounded, permanently disabled, and disfigured by his mob. He couldn't lift a finger there. He couldn't call the National Guard that was under his direct control, because the DC National Guard's under his control. But he wants to federalize the National Guard and send federal troops to California when the state and local law enforcement leaders are saying, we don't need your help. You're just going to make it worse. And he did. So California went to court. We're totally with them on that to say, no, you don't have the power to federalize the National Guard or send troops into our state unless there's a real insurrection or rebellion. They won a great opinion from the district court judge. Unfortunately, the Ninth Circuit has put a stay on that. And so, that's what these judicial battles are like. It's a seesaw fight. Sometimes you win, sometimes you lose, but we're winning every single day. I think we now are over 195 preliminary injunctions or temporary restraining orders against this reign of lawlessness. But as you move up in the courts, it gets more difficult. And of course, the most difficult is the Supreme Court, because you're already starting with a 2-justice deficit with Scalia and Thomas, who are just acting like, mega, political operatives out in a state primary election or something.
Yeah.
You mentioned Gavin Newsom, to sort of switch gears only partially. I spoke to him last week, and he described, this incredible situation where the president said, I spoke to Gavin Newsom in the last day about the National Guard. It turned out they had spoken 4 days earlier, and that it was not about the National Guard. And Governor Newsom brought up that generally, he thinks something is going on here. He's not a doctor. He didn't make any medical diagnosis, but the idea that this is a guy who's a little bit unstable. Sometimes there's 30-hour periods during which there's not a longer than 3-hour break at any point from posting on Truth Social, right? I'm talking even overnight, no more than a 3-hour break.
Wow.
It's sort of like what's happening here. Have any of your colleagues on the Republican side intimated to you that they also suspect something may be going on with the president that is more than just he's a little excited? In other words, all of these questions that the corporate media doesn't seem to want to ask about
Not
the
a
president.
word from any of them. Some of them do have questions about war powers.
Okay.
So, some of them are willing, at least behind the scenes, to have a rational discussion about what's taking place. But on that, no. In fact, they keep talking about Joe Biden. Right. And I think that the obsession with Joe Biden's geriatric health is a complete projection of what is going on with Donald Trump now. Of course, but nobody's talked about the 25th Amendment and presidential incapacity or inability to meet the demands of his office. But what we see on TV is truly cause for some alarm.
Not to ask you to diagnose the Republican Party or individual Republicans or even get into their brains, that's impossible. But,
unless you want to.
Yeah. But what do you're here, you work with these people on a daily basis. you hear conversations at an arm's length. What do you think the underlying motivation is or cause of their, I mean, is it just pure sycophancy? Is it fear of Donald Trump? Is it fear of electoral consequences based on the ire of MAGA? What is it?
Well, it reminds me of the conversation we're having about judicial independence, because the framers of the Constitution and Jefferson in the Declaration said King George was adamant about subduing the political will of the judges and controlling their salaries and controlling their tenure in office.
He swapped judges out.
Yeah.
Yeah. Before the revolution.
And, we're in a fight right now to protect judicial independence against Republicans who want to try to control their access to security funding, for example. Well, judges have to know that they have adequate security funding. Otherwise, they're in real trouble in terms of being able to render the decisions they need to make if they're worried about whether they or their families are going to come under violent attack. And the threats are through the roof, not just for members of Congress now, but for judges too, ever since Trump began to say that Judge Boasberg should be impeached for what he had done, a radical left rogue judge who was appointed by President George W. Bush and was Brett Kavanaugh's roommate at Yale Law School. So, but it's the same sort of thing, which is there's a political economy to the invertebrate discipline and cultishness of the Republican Party. Most of these people feel like Donald Trump could oust them just by endorsing a primary opponent. He used to have Elon Musk's money that he could unleash on them, but they got plenty of other sources to get money to unleash on them. But it's not just that they could diselect you or get you thrown out of office. It's also that, well, there's violent threats out there that are very easy to be activated, but also, even if you decide, okay, you're going to get out of Congress and go do something different, you will never work in this town again, kind of thing. You will never be a lobbyist. We will not allow you to work in our hemisphere. So to get out is really to get out. That's like Liz Cheney, Adam Kinzinger, Mitt Romney. And it's not a surprise that some of them have independent sources of power and income where they're not so worried about it. But a lot of the Republicans feel like, I don't know what I would do if these people oust me. And it's like being shunned by a religious cult at that point. So there is a real regime of fear that's taking place. On the other hand, that's not attractive to everybody else in society. They see how the Republican Party is operating, and most people don't want to end up sleeping on the basement listening to tapes of Donald Trump all night and selling flowers and incense at Dulles Airport for the rest of their lives. They would rather think for themselves like Americans do.
Last thing I want to ask you, and we'll let you go. A question I get from my audience often is, January 2029, does the MAGA movement end with the end of Donald Trump's second term, or is this a movement that might persevere? And if it's a maybe, what does it depend on?
Yeah, I think that the evils that people do in their lives probably live on beyond them, right? And, MAGA will keep going on in some form. The real question for us is, we've got to put the program in place right now to show people what we're fighting to create in Project 2029. That's going to be our project. That's going to be our answer to Project 2025. And that's got to be not just democracy and freedom and justice for Americans across the country, but continuing achievements of democracy in terms of things like universal pre-K and making sure we've got health care for everybody in the country and a right to vote, a constitutional right to vote for everybody, and statehood. And I'm not talking about Greenland and Canada and Panama. I'm talking about Washington, D.C. and Puerto Rico and millions of disenfranchised Americans across the country. So I'm not content to be talking about restoration of the status quo ante before Donald Trump ever appeared. I'm talking about moving strong constitutional democracy into the future for this century. And we've got the leaders, we've got the activists to do it, and we got the kids in Democracy Summer all over America ready to fight.
Congressman, thank you.
Yeah, I was going to ask you for one last inspirational message, but you nailed it right there, so I didn't need to
Thanks so much.
Great to see you guys. Keep up the great work.
Thank you.
Because the media is not the enemy of the people. You're the people's best friend. So
that's what we're saying.
Doing, so.
I've been saying that for a long time.
The president was wonderful, as always, informative, funny. Told me he liked seeing me on TV. Yeah, he signed a bunch of stuff. It's cool.
So Donald Trump is bribing United States Republican congressmen to vote for this budget bill. The Freedom Caucus, the most dedicated to the prospect of freedom and liberty, and they have their ideologies all square. You can't sway them. You certainly can't bribe them. And what if you were to attempt to bribe a Freedom Caucus member? What would it take? Something notable. It would have to be something very off the charts, very valuable to make a dent into the integrity of a Republican member of the Freedom Caucus, right? If you thought right, no, you're wrong. Here's a headline for the New York Times. Trump goes on charm offensive as he woos holdout Republicans. President Trump worked the phones and welcomed Republicans to the White House to cajole them into supporting his mega bill. They left with signed merchandise and photos of the Oval Office. That's all it takes. And if you're questioning, that's just the New York Times. There's no way that's true, right? There's no way that that's all it takes to get into the mind, to convince one of these stalwart ideologues in the Freedom Caucus to vote for Donald Trump's bankrupting bill. The bill that's going to add trillions and trillions of dollars to the national debt while robbing 16 or 17 million Americans of their health insurance, decimating the poor and working class in this country, adding to the funding in our already Nazi-like security state with Donald Trump's secret police. It's a nightmare. So if you think that, no, it would take more than that, you'd be wrong, because here is Tim Burchett, one of these Freedom Caucus dipshits, talking about with gushy giddiness about his autograph merch from the dipshit fascist president of the United States.
At the White House today, we watched a parade of Republicans filing into the West Wing as President Trump engaged in a charm offensive to try to win them over. Some of those that you saw going into the West Wing here on West Exec, that driveway right by the White House, are moderates who are skeptical of the bill and its changes that it makes to Medicaid. Others are from the far-right House Freedom Caucus. They say they're not on board with this bill because of the trillions of dollars it is projected to add to the federal deficit. All of them are seeking assurances from the president that they'll get something out of voting yes. And some of them also seem to be looking for swag.
The president was wonderful, as always, informative, funny. Told me he liked seeing me on TV, which is kind of cool. I'm incredibly humble. What he signed for you? Yeah, he signed a bunch of stuff. It's cool.
Yeah. No shame, no dignity. These are grown adult men who are, it's really cool. The president signed something for me, Donald Trump. This is how the New York Times categorized it. A clique of House Freedom Caucus members walked out of the White House in the early afternoon, their attitudes seemingly adjusted. Representative Tim Burchett, a Republican of Tennessee, was one of them. He posted a video on social media that I just showed you, gushing about the 2-hour experience he just had with his president. Quote, "The president was wonderful as all." I'm not going to read all the quotes. You just watch the video. Mr. Burchett told the New York Times later on that his name had been misspelled on the placard placed in front of his chair for the cabinet room meeting. It was missing an R. So the president scribbled in the letter, signed both sides of the card, and gave it to him as a souvenir. Mr. Burchett said the president also loaded up the son of Representative Chip Roy, Republican of Texas, with souvenirs. Tchotchkes. They're selling out the United States of America for autograph merch. Going against long-held beliefs, long-held ideas about the budget, about spending, about being good stewards of the American taxpayer dollar, about the CBO itself. Tim Burchett was on CNN last night with Breonna Keeler, and she took him to task. A rare moment of good journalism from Breonna Keeler and the CNN team, holding Tim Burchett to account for his previous adoration and respect and adherence to the findings of the CBO that he now is saying is a partisan operation, even though it's run by a Republican. Watch this. And also, he's doing the old, I can't hear you, ma'am, what are you saying, y'all? Watch this.
So you're taking issue with the CBO estimate here?
Yes, ma'am, I do have an issue with it. The office is very partisan. I mean, 85% of the people in their healthcare division identify as a Democrat, or they've contributed to Democrats, or they're registered Democrats. They're leading, I believe their leading economist is that. We ought to do away with these organizations because we use them when we like them. We don't use them when we don't like them. And you've got a bunch of bureaucrats in here that are on a lifetime gravy train. And frankly, we've got independent agencies that can do that. We have people up here with accounting degrees that can do the math. So I feel like that is a waste of taxpayers' money.
So in January 2024, there was a Republican who trusted the CBO so much that they reintroduced a resolution to require the House clerk to read the CBO estimate of any bill. I believe that was you, sir, the third time you introduced that resolution. Is that right?
That's correct, ma'am. Of course, and that proves
but
just what I said.
But you don't like the CBO now.
Ma'am?
But you don't like the CBO now. You introduced that resolution over multiple years, but now you're dissing the CBO.
Did the bill pass?
Your resolution?
Did the bill pass? Yes, ma'am.
You introduced it, sir.
I know
It's
it, ma'am,
irrelevant.
but did it pass? They never pass because nobody wants any verification. It proves my point. When it serves us well,
you took a stance and you were
we're for it, but when it doesn't, we don't. So
you're clear about where you are on the CBO. I just want to say, but just to get to where you said earlier that you were closer to voting yes after speaking with the president. I saw the vice president sent you put a nice tweet up that you responded to. What did the president say to you that made you feel maybe closer to voting yes?
He talked about the economic output that we would have that was not in the CBO scores, and along those lines, he talked about other things that I'm not going to share, but because it was in privacy. But I think there's a lot of things that will probably be revealed when this is passed, and I think America will embrace it further.
I mean, what he didn't tell you is that he got some merch. Listen, Brianna. Yeah. I used to have very strongly held beliefs and dedication to the prospect of the budget and being good stewards and all the things that Republicans talk about, right? About the debt, about the deficit, about not bankrupting, not saddling our grandchildren with all kinds of debt, they used to say all the time. They still do. But, I know I said that, but I got merch. Donald Trump scribbled with his giant Sharpie, his gaudy, weird signature. Of course he's going to sell out the country. You would too if you got signed merch from Trump. These are unserious people. Unfortunately, they are unserious people leading in very serious times. Tim Burchett, tip of the spear, acts as though he's a mighty righteous man of God, a God-fearing Christian man who wants to advance the philosophies and the teachings, the theology of Jesus Christ. Yet he's going to kill God's children, take food from the mouths of hungry. The sick will die without health insurance. All of the things that Jesus talked about advancing, he is against because he is a liar, he's a charlatan, and he is a weak-minded goober who can be bought with Trump merch, who can be bought with a placard that misspelled his name. They have so little respect for him, they didn't even spell his fucking name right. Yet, where do I sign? Where do I vote yes on the bill? Good job, Burchett. Every one of these monsters needs to be voted out of office in the midterms. Remember this, Tennessee. Remember this moment. He sold you out for Trump merch. Yeah.
You know it's a good piece of legislation because every single Democrat hates it. And the reason they hate it is because this bill actually empowers Americans.
You know, if there was good reason to vote for Donald Trump's disastrous budget bill, this disastrous budget bill that's going to rob, I'll get into those details. But if there was good reason, Republicans would be making those reasons. Instead, it's lie after lie after lie after lie. Or in the case of Jim Jordan in this clip I'm getting ready to show you, it's just, yeah, we got to vote for it to own the libs. We got to vote for it because Democrats hate it. It's unserious people. That's not a reason to vote for legislation that will impact hundreds of millions of American families. It's not a reason. But leave it to Jim Jordan to say that's his justification. It's just unflinching fealty, loyalty, worshipfulness of Donald Trump. If Donald Trump bent over and said, hey, reach inside my ass and just fish around in there, Jim Jordan, you'd see he'd be rolling up his sleeves and it'd be easy because he never wears a jacket, right? Watch him just be as ghoulish as he can on CNN, giving his justification, his motivation to vote for this abomination.
Yeah, good to be with you,
And
Casey.
I do want to ask you, in that context, it is Freedom Caucus members who are very concerned about this bill. I'm old enough to remember when, if there was a bill on the floor that added this much to our debt and deficit, I cannot imagine you would have been happy about it in those years. And yet, you have been approaching this a little bit differently. What is your message to your colleagues in that group right now?
Look, we all wish it'd save more money, but you know this is a good bill, and I tell people all the time, you know it's a good piece of legislation because every single Democrat hates it. And the reason they hate it is because this bill actually empowers Americans. It empowers families. It cuts their taxes. It keeps their taxes low. It says to the hardworking people who are working and getting tips, we're not going to tax those tips. It says to parents, we're going to give you school choice in our tax code. It says the border that's now secure under President Trump, we're going to allocate resources to keep it secure. And maybe most importantly, or as importantly, is it says to hardworking American families who are paying for all this government, for people who are getting a benefit in the welfare system, if they're able-bodied adults, guess what? Now, from now on, they're going to have to work. So I think it's good for all those common sense, fundamental Republican principles. That's why the Democrats don't like it. While it doesn't cut enough spending, I get it, but we got small majorities, and this is probably as good as it's going to get. So I am certainly for this piece of legislation.
Admitting that it doesn't do the thing he says the reason to vote for it is because every single Democrat hates it. That statement was preceded by, we all wish it saved more money. Yeah, it's going to bankrupt our grandkids, which we act like is a big deal, but it makes the Democrats mad. That's why we do it. Here is what this bill will do. On Medicaid, this is from the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities, the Senate Republican bill would cut Medicaid by nearly $1 trillion compared to $800 billion in the House Republican bill. The deeper cuts translate into larger harmful impacts. The bill would also expand the House Republican bill's provision that takes Medicaid coverage away from people who don't meet a red tape-laden work requirement by applying it to parents enrolled through the Medicaid expansion who have children older than 13. And it doesn't get any better on food assistance, on the aspect of what the Republicans want to do to hungry children. There will be an impact on more than 40 million people who receive basic food assistance through SNAP, including some 16 million children, 8 million seniors, and 4 million non-elderly adults with disabilities, all of whom would be affected by the cuts in this bill. Most states would be required to pay 5 to 15% of food benefits, and if a state can't make up for these massive federal cuts with tax increases or spending cuts elsewhere in its budget, it would have to cut its SNAP program, such as by restricting eligibility or making it harder for people to enroll, or it could opt out of the program altogether, terminating food assistance entirely in the state. Here is a Blue Sky post from Brittany Page talking about Josh Shapiro, the governor of Pennsylvania's response on this. Governor Josh Shapiro on the harm Trump's budget will cause the nearly 2 million Pennsylvanians receiving SNAP benefits. Quote, there's a real question as to whether or not we'd even be able to operate SNAP any longer, given the change in the formula and given the people that are going to be knocked off. This is the reason not to vote for the bill. Jim Jordan, the reason to vote for it isn't because Democrats hate it. This is the reason Democrats hate it. This is the reason you should hate it. You self-described patriot. It is amazing to me, these Republicans, they hate America. You can't hate Americans and want to harm inextricably Americans while claiming that you love America. Those two things are incompatible. Let's move on to the rich gaining and the poor absolutely being decimated by this bill. A June analysis of the House bill by Congressional Budget Office, for instance, found resources for the poorest would decrease by about $1,600 per year under the legislation, largely due to cuts to Medicaid and food aid, which would be more aggressive under the Senate bill. Meanwhile, the wealthiest would gain an average of $12,000. Another report from the Yale Budget Lab suggests the bottom fifth of earners would lose about $560 per year, while the top 20% would gain $6,000. Now look, that may not seem a lot to you because you're probably not the poorest among us. But if you are the poorest among us, and I've been in this situation, $1,600 is the difference between life and death. It's the difference between eating or not. It's the difference between your child being able to go to school or to daycare or not. This will harm Americans. As Jim Jordan makes his fucking jokes about Democrats all hate it, so let's vote for it. And it gets worse. They plan to harm people with disabilities in this country. Medicaid provides health coverage, including for home and community-based services, for about 15 million people with disabilities, representing over 1/3 of all people with disabilities, according to KFF. The House Republicans' health agenda also targets the ACA marketplaces, which provide coverage and financial assistance to more than 20 million people, including people with disabilities. The legislation fails to extend the expiring enhanced premium tax credits for marketplace coverage, which will lead to skyrocketing premiums. And if that is not enough, if you are someone who these arguments and these statistics don't sway, how about the fact that we are ushering in a next level police state? We have Donald Trump's masked, unidentified secret police roving the streets of the United States in their mission of mass deportation, sending people to gulags and concentration camps outside of the borders of the United States to be tortured, like Kilmar, Abrego, Garcia, which I'm going to be talking about later today, but also constructing concentration camps within the border of the United States. And this bill will add billions to that. As Don Moynihan notes, ICE's annual budget for detentions would skyrocket from $3.4 billion in the present fiscal year to $45 billion until the end of the 2029 fiscal year, a 365% increase, and a figure that outstrips the combined funding for all 50 federal prisons. I'm going to read that again because that is a stark reminder of exactly where we will be if this budget passes. A figure, the $45 billion, that outstrips the combined funding of all 50 federal prisons. The ICE detention budget is larger than the total budget of USAID used to be. The ICE detention budget increase is larger than cuts in education or for SNAP in the big, beautiful bill. It is larger than cuts to NIH, CDC, and cancer research combined. It is on the scale of the type of supplemental budgets that the U.S. passed when engaged in foreign wars. But the Democrats hate it, so let's vote for it. Listen, it is not hyperbole. It's not just me being bombastic when I call these fucking people ghouls. They want to harm the voiceless simply because they're voiceless. They want to harm poor people because they don't have the means to speak up. They're so focused already on survival that they don't get involved in politics. Jim Jordan is one of these ghouls. Do better, Ohio. Do better than electing these bootlicking, ass-kissing yes men, sycophants, bootlickers, cult members of Donald Trump. They will harm you for the sake of Donald Trump, for the sake of being in the good graces of the dear leader. It's disgusting. Midterms cannot come quick enough. Anyway, what do you think? I invite you to this conversation. You can comment below in the comment section. That'll help the algorithm to find this content worthy to share to others. I would appreciate that very much. You can also call the voicemail line. Leave me a fewer than 3-minute voicemail, 714-576-4054. And of course, as always, you can email me daily@dollemore.com. Please consider supporting this work, this effort that I put on a daily basis. For $2 a month, you can help me produce these videos and reach the audience that I do. I would appreciate that very much. You can click the join button below for $2 a month, become a channel member. You can also go over to patreon.com/IDoubtIt podcast. Great ways to help support this work. You can go to dollemore.com, buy some merch. We just released a children's book a few months ago called The Grateful Child. I mean, gratitude. We need to find it where we can, right?
I don't think you could have told me a year ago that we would be at a place in this country where we would be building something known as Alligator Alcatraz, that Donald Trump and Kristi Noem would be posing for pictures. And oh, by the way, they're selling merch.
So as many of you know, last week or a couple weeks ago now, I talked to Senator Cory Booker and Alex Padilla and Elizabeth Warren, Tina Smith, and I spoke to each one of them about this new political order in which we live, that the old political order, the old way of doing things of my good friend across the aisle really no longer exists. And there needs to be a new strategy related to how we deal with Republicans, how we work with Republicans, since we do not have partners in governance anymore. Well, there is a new crop, a new generation of politicians, people who are seeking to be public servants. And one of those is Mallory McMorrow, who's running for Senate in Michigan, who joins me right now. Mallory, thank you for joining me. How are you today?
I am doing as well as any of us can in this hellscape that we live in. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, listen, I appreciate your effort. It seems like your campaign is really picking up steam. Before I get to that, though, how are you? What kind of energy are you bringing to this fight? You're endeavoring for an impossible job to, as I just mentioned, govern with people who do not want to govern. How are you seeking to deal with this new political order?
I mean, that's real. And I've now been in elected office for 7 years. I'm the state Senate majority whip in the state of Michigan. And I came into a state Senate that had been controlled by Republicans since 1984. So serving in the minority. And it was a real rude wake up call to me in my first probably 2 years in office to realize I work with people who just fundamentally want to break it from the inside. And that changes how you think about doing the job. It's not enough to reach out with an olive branch and to come up with bill ideas to work together. This is about who wins the battle for attention. Donald Trump runs the presidency in the White House like it's a reality TV show, which is no surprise. He came from reality television. A majority of his cabinet has been on Fox News. They're TV people. So they're running it like it's a show. And it requires understanding that and knowing how to capture attention on social media, digital media, traditional media, and get the message out there in a way that, you know, whoever captures the most attention wins, for better or for worse.
Yeah, it seems as though, and listen, a couple days ago, I played a clip of you on the floor of the Michigan Senate talking about this disaster bill that the Republicans are forcing down the throats of Americans. You do seem to be someone who communicates well and understands the new lay of the land. And it seems as though the people of Michigan are responding to your campaign. You've had, I mean, I don't know at granular levels exactly how record-breaking it is, but it seems unusual how many tens of thousands of individual donors giving small amounts to your campaign. You got to feel good about that, no?
I feel amazing about it. You know, there were some people who attempted to write me off as a candidate before we even got started. You know, I'm a state senator, and there was this argument to be made that unless you're currently a federal office holder, you don't have business running for this. And I challenge that. You know, we sent Carl Levin to the United States Senate from the Detroit City Council. And I don't think anybody has been a better public servant in the Senate in Michigan than Carl Levin. We launched this campaign in April, and we just announced our first close of books, our financial quarter. We raised $2.1 million, which is massive. But more than that, it came from 28,000 individual people. 97% of our contributions were under $100. This is something that people are believing in, who find themselves attracted to a message and an energy that feels very new, is probably a little bit more connected to the ground and what's happening here in Michigan. And it's exciting. We just got to keep going.
You know, you first came on my radar when I was at the Democratic National Convention last summer, when you brought out the giant hulking Project 2025 book. I'm sure that you are among the rest of us who are not surprised by what's taking place right now with the implementation of Project 2025. But it seems as though it's worse than we could have imagined, with gulags, internment camps, concentration camps, call them what you will, being erected to be put into operation here in the borders of the United States. We're learning that Abrego Garcia was tortured in the Salvadoran prison. It is the worst instincts of the lizard brain of Donald Trump come to life. And you were one of the first to really kind of sound the alarm on a national stage. Are you planning to hit the ground running if indeed you are elected? And I think you will be, to put up a fight against these fascist efforts of this Republican Party.
Absolutely. But it has to be a yes and. We have to, number one, recognize the attention economy aspect of it, but also recognize that Republicans had a plan. You know, I walked out, to your point, with the massive copy of Project 2025 and slammed it on the podium and started kind of reading and analyzing it in real time, something we kept going throughout the convention. And they are now executing that plan faster than they even thought possible. I don't think you could have told me a year ago that we would be at a place in this country where we would be building something known as Alligator Alcatraz, that Donald Trump and Kristi Noem would be posing for pictures in, you know, to your point, what looks like a gulag, just rows and rows and rows of beds, that they're celebrating that they built this in 8 days. And oh, by the way, they're selling merch. It's heinous. So yes, I intend to get in and fight tooth and nail for what is right. What we know about Trump's immigration plans, as a good example, is it is security theater. What they are doing is terrorizing communities. They're going after mothers who are trying to immigrate the right way to stay with their kids. They went after an 18-year-old here in Detroit who was on his way to a field trip, who was 3 credits away from graduation, and they deported him. They're not going after violent criminals. They're not going after offenders. And it's actually breaking down trust within immigrant communities and within cities and urban areas that they are targeting in a way that's going to make us less safe, because it's going to make it less likely that people are going to want to call the police. It's going to make it less likely that people are going to want to work with criminal investigators, because people are being sent away who have done absolutely nothing wrong. So yes, we have to get in and fight this tooth and nail, but we also have to come in with a plan for what are we going to do the day after, because we have to start believing that there is going to be a future after Donald Trump, but we can't be caught on day one of that reality not having a plan to put in place, because otherwise we're not going to have power.
I like the yes and approach because it doesn't discount exactly what's happening. Look, it used to be a situation where, you know, I would interview somebody, or before I was, you know, a dum-dum on YouTube talking to politicians and people in power, that I'd be asking a bunch of wonky questions. But let me ask you this. How are you prepared to do a job that is beyond public service, where we've got this administration that is literally arresting mayors, elected mayors of cities, bringing charges against congresswomen, tackling, subduing, forcing to their faces sitting United States senators, the position you seek, How are you feeling about going into that? Obviously, we need a plan for not just the midterms, but beyond. But you're walking into a situation where you're not going to be necessarily protected based on your position of privilege and power. How do you wrestle with that?
That's right. And I believe that what people are looking for is fighters. And we may be critical of that, but I heard on the ground in Michigan in this last cycle, I was campaigning all over the state, not only for the top of the ticket, but for many of our state house candidates. I heard that the Democratic Party feels weak and that they're not fighters and that Donald Trump is fighting for me. And that sticks with me in a way that it's my instinct to push back, but we have to be able to throw a punch on our own terms. And I would say that I've got a pretty good track record of doing that here in Michigan. I was accused by a colleague, a Republican colleague, a couple of years ago of wanting to groom and sexualize kindergartners. I mean, slandered me in one of the most horrific ways possible. And my first instinct was to say nothing because I was raised to say you don't give bullies attention. But I realized that that wasn't doing anything to stop it. So I took to our Senate floor and on my own terms, didn't take the bait. We know that grooming is typically an attack that's levied on the LGBTQ community, of which I am not a member. But I was very intentional in saying, I am a straight, white, Christian, married, suburban mom who knows that hate only wins when people like me let it happen. I was trying to speak to people who look like me, people who maybe started joining Moms for Liberty groups to say, we have another path. And then when that speech blew up, it went viral. I didn't just accept that, oh, I'm getting attention now. I opened a PAC. We leveraged that moment in that spotlight to put a media plan together. We raised millions of dollars and we helped flip control of our state Senate for the first time in my entire lifetime. And then we got into power and we governed. That is what people are looking for, not excuses, not people taking to a podium and saying, well, we don't have power right now, but don't worry, their polling numbers will come down in the midterms and then we'll get them in a couple of years. We have to push back and we have to fight back. And we've seen the worst of the worst here in Michigan. I often say we're the canary in the coal mine. Long before January 6th, we had an armed protest in our state capitol. And you may have seen the photo of 4 heavily armed gunmen in the Senate gallery. What you don't see below that photo is me on the floor. So we've seen it, we've faced it, but we've also written a playbook for how we can fight back and we can win on our own terms.
You know, I like to see it. You very prescient. You usurped my last question, which was going to be a comparison between my home state. I mean, I live in Washington, D.C. now. You know, I can see the Capitol from my front porch. But I grew up by Christian nationalist, radical evangelical parents in northern Idaho. So there's a lot of parallels between the radicals in my home state and the radical element in Michigan. So I like the comparison of the canary in the coal mine because not only is it a harbinger of things to come, but it's also a roadmap of how to get shit done. Exactly. And Michigan flipping the different bodies, actually combating the radicals who gather on the steps during COVID or whatever other crisis and tyranny that they claim. And I, for one, am very happy that we do have someone running for office of a slightly younger generation who's ready to fight. So thanks.
Thank you. I mean, it's a scary time, but I constantly ask myself, to your point about kind of the extremist groups in Idaho, we've seen it here in Michigan. Mm-hmm. This is our moment. We can stand up. There are more of us than there are of them. And I think we have to remember that because it's really easy to get overwhelmed and scared and shut down. But if we do that, then those people who pick up a gun and think that it is completely okay to go and target somebody just because you disagree with them politically, they win. And that is not the country that I want to live in. That's not the country that I want my daughter to grow up in. And this is our moment to take our country back.
We will leave it there. I would just ask you this. Leave some time open in your schedule. Come back and we can have another conversation as the campaign goes on. I'm invigorated by your participation and exactly how you're managing your campaign relative to communication. So
I'd love that. Thanks.
Thanks for hanging out with me.
For sure.
I know people are going to say this is not who we are, and it isn't who we should be. It isn't who we've claimed to be for generations. It's not who we aspire to be. But it is who we are right now. We are a nation that sends individuals to gulags in foreign nations to be tortured. I hold in my hand a filing from the lawyers of Kilmar, Abrego, Garcia that outlines horrific, inhumane, illegal treatment of this individual that the United States under Donald Trump sent without a trial, without adjudication, without due process. They made claims that they did not back up. They did not prove. He was not found to be guilty of any crimes. And they sent him away to be tortured. Tortured. I'm going to read just very briefly a couple of paragraphs from this filing, and this is going to be it, just to let you know the depths of the depravity of Donald Trump, of Stephen Miller, of the mushmouth dildo with ears, Tom Homan, that they will radically alter a man, sending him to a foreign concentration camp is the best way to outline it, to describe it, because that is what it is, where he's threatened. He's threatened with beatings, with rape, with torture, that if he doesn't abide by, if he's not able to stand up under his own weight, we're going to throw you to the wolves, to the terrorists and the gang members in this other cell. Get a load of this. Plaintiff Abrego Garcia reports that he was subjected to severe mistreatment upon arrival at CCOT, including but not limited to severe beatings, severe sleep deprivation, inadequate nutrition, and psychological torture. I had a conversation with Brittany Page yesterday about this very thing. That I blame, obviously, Donald Trump and the current fascist regime, but I also blame the Republican Party going back decades now. George W. Bush, stalwart Republican, ushered this in, empowered Donald Trump, seeded in his mind the idea that this is a power granted to the President of the United States under the guise of securing us all from terror and threats within and without. This is the kind of shit we did during the war on terror that got us nowhere. That was page 21. Here's page 22. Upon arriving at I'm going to stop calling it the CCOT. We're going to start calling it the concentration camp. Upon arrival at the concentration camp, the detainees were greeted by a prison official who stated, "Welcome to the concentration camp. Whoever enters here does not leave." Plaintiff Abrego Garcia was then forced to strip, issued prison clothing, and subjected to physical abuse, including being kicked in the legs with boots and struck on his head and arms to make him change clothes faster. His head was shaved with a zero razor, and he was frog marched to cell 15, being struck with wooden batons all the way. By the following day, Plaintiff Abrego Garcia had visible bruises and lumps all over his body. It gets worse. It gets much, much worse. In cell 15, Plaintiff Abrego Garcia and 20 other Salvadorans were forced to kneel from approximately 9 p.m. overnight to 6 a.m., with guards striking anyone who fell from exhaustion. During this time, Plaintiff Abrego Garcia was denied bathroom access and soiled himself. The detainees were confined to metal bunks with no mattresses in an overcrowded cell with no windows, bright lights that remained on 24 hours a day, and minimal access to sanitation. He was not found guilty of any crime. And even if he were, even if he had been, there is no justification for torture, for starvation, for stress positions, if you want to call it that. It's torture. Page 23. While at the concentration camp, Prison officials repeatedly told plaintiff Abrego Garcia that they would transfer him to the cells containing gang members who, they assured him, would tear him apart. Indeed, plaintiff Abrego Garcia repeatedly observed prisoners in nearby cells who he understood to be gang members violently harm each other with no intervention from guards or personnel. Screams from nearby cells would similarly ring out throughout the night without any response from prison guards on personnel. Is this who we are? Apparently, this is who we are. For how long are we going to be making excuses for people who said, oh, the eggs are expensive? Donald Trump makes me feel good about what he's going to do. If you voted for Donald Trump, or even further, if you did not vote for Kamala Harris, with all of the evidence we have about what was going to take place, all of the evidence, you're culpable. You're guilty. You take part in this. This blood is on your hands too. During his first 2 weeks at the concentration camp, plaintiff Abrego Garcia suffered a significant deterioration in his physical condition and lost 31 pounds, dropping from approximately 215 pounds to 184. During his first 2 weeks, he lost 31 pounds. On April 9th, plaintiff Abrego Garcia and 4 others were transferred to different modules in the concentration camp, where they were photographed with mattresses and better food, photos that appeared to be staged to document improved conditions. And they want to act like they are the party of law and order, the party of justice, the party that respects the Constitution, that has prohibitions against cruel and unusual punishment. This is fascism. And this is what took place on foreign soil. They're erecting Alligator Alley or Alligator Alcatraz or whatever cute little disgusting name they're calling the concentration camps within the borders of the United States as they laugh their ghoulish laughs, recreating scenes from the 1940s in Nazi Germany. All while all the ICE officials, all the Homeland Security officials who sent him to his torture would just say, we're just following orders. It's the policy of the United States. Grr. This Nazi shit. I mean, this Nazi shit. It's not hyperbole. I'm not exaggerating. I'm not being bombastic. I'm not. This is what it is. And if you're a Republican and you celebrate this, fuck off. Fuck all the way off. If you're an independent and you think, well, Donald Trump really is taking care of law and order. Donald Trump is a 34 felony convicted criminal who is robbing us blind, who is enriching himself day after day after day, immune from criminal prosecution because he's the new dear leader king. And the Supreme Court found him to be such. Something's going to have to change. Something's going to have to change. Somebody's going to have to do something. We need our political leaders to stand up and start being the opposition party, to stop advancing the agenda of Donald Trump, to stop voting for his nominees, to stop voting for his legislation. John Fetterman, stop it. Fucking stop. The rest of the Senate, stop. When Donald Trump has a nominee, judicial or otherwise, you vote no. You vote no, no matter how qualified. You vote no. Because those nominees, will advance the agenda of Donald Trump. These are not partners in governance. How many times must I scream about this? I want to know what your opinions are on this. Let's have a conversation. We can do it in the comments. You can also call the voicemail line 714-576-4054. And of course, as always, you can email me daily@dollemore.com. Look, I know people are going to say this is not who we are, and it isn't who we should be. It isn't who we've claimed to be for generations. It's not who we aspire to be. But it is who we are right now. and we will be judged accordingly. And I don't mean in some divine way. Other nations are judging us by our leadership, by our behavior, by the torture that we not only allow, that we cheer on. Not all of us, but enough of us that you should be embarrassed by this, ashamed by this. I'm going to go. I'll see you next time. Be genuine. Take care of one another.